So now it's time to look at what's really the last piece of the puzzle when it comes to developing for the web. We've looked at how we can use HTML and CSS to style our content, and then we've used JavaScript and jQuery to make our pages interactive and functional within the browser. Then we looked at PHP to see how we could run code on the server side. And finally, what we need is a database to allow us to store details of our users or our content or whatever we want on our website that's going to be updated regularly. And we're going to be doing this with MySQL. SQL stands for Server Query Language, and there are various different types of SQL out there. We're going to be using MySQL because it's completely free, it's open source, and it's extremely widely used. It's also available very simply on the web hosting that comes with the course, and also if you've installed your own Apache server. So it's well worth learning. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to set up a MySQL database on Eco Web Hosting. Obviously, if you're using a different host, or if you've installed Apache on your own machine, you can follow their instructions to set up the database. So I'm going to be working on completewebdevelopercourse.com. So if you want to set this up and follow along, it's ecowebhosting.co.uk/cp/list domains. That will get a list of all your domain names. If you haven't set any up yet, then go to the hosting setup section of this course and do that first. And then when we click on the domain name here, that will take us to the cPanel where we can do a lot of things, but specifically we can set up databases. So here we go. I'm going to scroll down to Web Tools, and you can see the option inside Web Tools there is MySQL Databases. And here we are. All we need to do is put in a username. So let's pretend we want to create a database to store our users. So I might call this a users database. And then I'll click Create. And that's it. We've got our database up and running. If I then scroll down, you can see that it's created this database here, but the database username is not what I put in. This is because the username is changed depending on what server it's running on. So this one's running on CL29. And also, to keep databases separate, a random 3-character string is added on the end there. That also increases security because your database name is harder to guess. Also, make a note of the database password, which will be displayed just the once when you've created your database. We'll need that to connect to the database in the next lecture. The password is case sensitive. All right, so that's set up our database. Let's see how we can manage our database in order to add some tables and some content. You get taken over to PHP MyAdmin. So this is a very common database interaction tool, and it's pretty good as well. I use it all the time. So we've got some information about our database server, versions, etc. over on the right, password options and appearances in the middle, but really what we want to do is click on the database itself that we want to work with. So I'm going to click there over on the left, and then because this is an empty database, there are no tables in it, my only option is to create a table. So the simplest way to think about a database is that it is a collection of tables, and each table could be imagined to be more or less an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of rows and columns. So if I want to store a bunch of users, I might want to create a table or a spreadsheet with the name users. Unlike an Excel spreadsheet though, I need to specify how many columns I want my table to have. I can change this later on, but I think I want to store an email address, a password, and an ID number for each of my users. So I'm going to put in 3 columns there. All right. So now I need to describe each of my columns and tell the database what type of variable they're going to contain. So I'm going to start off with my ID number. Now it's a very, very good idea to have an ID number in all of your tables. So it should really be the first thing that you put in every time. Not only does it make it easy to find a particular record, but it also actually makes your database more efficient and faster when it comes to finding information in it. So we'll call it ID. It's going to be an integer, so just a whole number there. I don't need to specify any length on values. I don't need to give it a default value. I'm going to miss out those bits there. But what I do want to have is I want to set this as the primary key. And then the database knows that this number is going to be a unique key that we can use to refer to a particular row. And then I'm going to click AI, which is short for auto increment. And that essentially just means it'll add 1 to the ID each time we add a new user, which is a very useful feature. So we don't need to set the ID number manually ourselves. Okay, so now we've got our ID number. We're going to have our email address, which I'll call email. And this time we don't want an integer because it's not a number. I'm going to use a text type there. You can see we've got lots of different types of column, similar to the types of variable that we have, but many more. We're going to look at several of those later on in this section, but I'm just going to go for text for my email field. Finally, we're going to have password as well, and that's going to be text 2. We don't need to set default values for any of these, or indeed change any of these more complex options at all. We can add some comments if we want, but I'm just going to leave that blank and then click save. And that will then create our table right here. And you can see there's a number of things that we can do with that table. We can browse the data in it. We can change the structure, so we could add or remove columns or change the types of certain columns, etc. We can search it, we can insert data into it, we can make it empty, or we can drop it or delete it completely. So as we don't have any data yet, let's insert something first of all, and then we'll have a quick browse before we go on to connecting to our database with the PHP script in the next video. So let's add an email address. I'll go for rob@robpercival.co.uk, and then I'm going to very securely use my password as a password. And then we just click go, and then it runs this SQL, which we won't look into in that much detail right now, but we'll be writing stuff like this in just a couple of videos time. You can possibly imagine what this does. It says insert into, and then there's the database name and the table name. And then we've got the 3 column names and then the values for each of those names. So we've got null for ID because that's auto increment. So it's going to be created by itself. And then we've got rob@robpercival.co.uk for the email and my password for the password. And you can see that's been successful because we've got a tick up there. Great. So now that we've added a row to our table, let's just browse and have a look. And you can see now we've got the table itself with an item in it. So it's got an ID of 1 because it's the first one. It's got the email there and it's got the password. So that's pretty much all we're going to look at here. One very quick word on passwords is that you should never store your users' passwords in plain text like I'm doing here. This is very bad because if you get hacked and someone gets access to your database, then they can see all of your users' passwords. So they would be able to access their accounts on your system. But more significantly, because people use the same password for many different accounts, they might well be able to access their PayPal account or even their Twitter account and take control over it. So I'll show you how to properly store passwords later on in this section, but for now, we're just concentrating on how databases work. So there we go. Feel free to have a click around PHPMyAdmin and see what else you can do. But essentially what we've got is a database, is a set of tables, each of which can be thought of as more or less an Excel spreadsheet with columns, in this case ID, email and password, and then rows with particular values in this case an ID of 1, email of rob@robpercival.co.uk, and then password of my password. And then we can have as many of these as we like, and we can search them, we can update them, we can do whatever we like with them. So databases are extremely powerful, they're absolutely critical to web development. But of course, we don't want to just work with our database in PHPMyAdmin. We want it to run on our website. And to do that, we need to use a server language, and we're going to do that with PHP. So we'll see how to connect to our database with PHP in the next video.